Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of the Pepper Podcast. For those who are returning, welcome back. And if you are new, the Pepper Podcast covers a wide range of spicy events that occur in our daily lives. Two high school students tackle heated topics through discussion. I'm your host, Jay Mehta, and joining me is my co-host, Andy Watson Oskunpen. And today's topic will be covering the prison system and how the broken imprisonment cycle has led to a socio-economic collapse in societies, stereotypes among individuals, and excessive cost to local communities. It approximately costs $47 to house an inmate for a single night, which can add up with the 2.1 million people incarcerated nationwide.
Yeah. So I think that this topic especially is very prevalent. It's a very concerning issue, but not one that we as Americans really like to talk about.
Yeah, it's
Like,
not really
yeah,
brought up to light.
yeah, it's like recognized, but it's not necessarily like discussed on a deeper level. And it's really scary because uh in September 2013 at least, the incarceration rate of the US was the highest in the world at
Hmm.
716 per 100,000 per
Yeah,
per
individual. Yeah.
person in the US, yes. And however, by like 2019, it had fallen to 419 in state and federal prisons per 100,000. But we have seen significant drops, which is good, but we're still ranked amongst the highest in the world
Yeah,
for prison population and incarceration rates.
I agree. So like this is definitely a huge prevalent issue. I actually had the I wouldn't call it pleasure. I had the experience of um going into a prison through my youth leadership group, and we
Mhm.
saw firsthand. Well, we first saw court cases and things like that. And I feel like we can tie some court cases in as well. But basically just like with charges and things like that, once you're going
Yeah.
into jail, there are people who it ranges what they've done from like just because in the state of Tennessee marijuana is illegal. um Medical is fine, but so maybe just some drug charges or things like that to sexual abuse. um and so there's people that have not done really just made some bad life choices, but there have been people that have made horrible choices. But something that was really prevalent to me was how seriously like corrupt the general system is, because there's been so much there's so much that's going to be spent towards these individuals, yet they're still so underfunded that we've
Yeah.
created this feedback loop where they're being underfunded, but we're paying them a lot of money, but they're being underfunded, but they're paying them a lot of money. And so the amount of money that local governments have to spend is so exponentially great that they can't use that money for like schools and education, and improving their roads and infrastructure. And so this is something that's very important. I remember when I was there, they told me that the first thing that this is a rumor that the first thing that Columbus did when he came to America was he built a jail.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I feel like it's something that's not talked about a lot, but something that is very important.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you mention like the different offenses because most like people in jail are in there for drug charges,
Yeah.
right? Like that's literally the majority of the prison population, and a lot of it can like is very rooted in racism and the way that the U.S. has institutionalized that kind of discrimination and disproportionate representation and incarceration of Black and Hispanic peoples when it comes to drugs, specifically marijuana,
Yep.
right? We can go back to like Reagan and the war on drugs, and how he like, specifically associated a group of people with drugs and criminalized it, whereas other people of other groups, mainly white people,
Hmm.
they were pretty much free to do what they wanted with drugs.
Hmm.
And like that's still you can still see those effects today.
Yeah.
Most people are in there for nonviolent drug crimes,
Yeah.
and
I, d-
it's really
I,
shocking.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I have a
I was
story to
just
tell. So,
okay, I was just gonna say like it's really shocking
yeah, I agree.
that like the amount of people in there, like they're not necessarily bad people. They
Yeah.
just, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Made bad decisions.
Yeah.
Funny that you mentioned that. When we were witnessing court cases, there was somebody that had marijuana charges on them.
Hmm.
And so because it was a small dosage, the charge was dropped.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of charges among this person that were dropped. but one of them in particular was drug charges. And I thought that was just so interesting because like we've legalized medicinal marijuana,
Yeah,
but like like they said, like they dropped it in court, but like a small amount of marijuana was an entire charge that could have led them to jail. So I feel like that's something that's pretty like that's pretty sad to see. But just giving some data out there. So probably like the incarceration rates by race and sex. So white men ages 18 or older are approximately 1 in 106. Um, white men 18 or older are incarcerated versus Hispanic men 18 or older is 1 in 36. Black men 18 or older is 1 in 35, and even like more if we're like looking into it more. Black men ages 20 to 34 is 1 in 9.
yeah.
And so some of them may have been through bad decisions. Some of them may have been through bad conscience, but I feel like a good portion of it um, is just through some perpetual um, institutionalized a little bit of racism that
Hmm.
I've seen, especially with maybe not racism in the sense that they're being outright racist, but
Yeah,
racism in the sense of neglect.
yeah,
And so there's a neglect of maybe a certain race or favorability towards a certain race than another. Um,
yeah.
but let's not be a little discriminatory. Women as well. White women, 1 in 355. Hispanic women, 1 in 297, and in black women, 1 in 100. So this is between 35 to 39. So again, we're still seeing this general proportions and this
Mhm.
trend, um, and it is institutionalized based off of this data, um,
Yes.
which is so interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was gonna say, like when we're talking about drug crimes, how we talk about black men and white men, and vice versa. Um, we see oftentimes that black men get charged more severely for like the same exact criminal offense than white men, and
Hmm.
that to me is something that needs to be talked about because yeah, people are always saying like, how they say like, oh, it's black on black crime, or
Hmm.
but most crimes are interracial anyway.
Yeah,
Like, so like that's kind of a fallacious argument, but it's literally proven that black men get a higher sentence for the same offense than white men do.
yeah,
And a lot of it has to do with going back to that institutionalized racism and discrimination found within the justice system.
yeah.
And it's alarming.
I definitely agree. And something also that backs that up is like when you're in court, number one with bonds, bail bonds, and affording a lawyer. So I feel like bail bonds are pretty much like a if you've ever played Monopoly, those like pay to get out of jail cards. Um,
Mhm.
so it's basically how rich are you in that circumstance, and not to mention most people can't afford a lawyer, or like a private lawyer to that extent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they are having to just have like the state lawyers and things like that that
Yeah.
aren't
And they aren't even
necessarily.
lawyers. They're paralegals.
Yeah,
Like that's not even a lawyer.
yeah, but like they're not. Yeah, so these paralegals are not only not as talented, or maybe not as experienced as these private lawyers, but they have um like these private lawyers are able to take laws and they're able to interpret it in such ways that it works for the client's favor, and not being able to afford that places people in poverty areas or just not people that cannot afford a lawyer in a severe disadvantage. Not to mention bail bonds, right? It costs a lot of money to house an inmate for a single night. So the cost to house an inmate in a single night is over time it's greatly higher than the amount of money that is gained through bail bonds, because it's just so much money that we're spending on incarcerated people because it's $47 a night, and once you take 2.1 million people, incarcerated nationwide, that's a lot of money that adds up very quickly. So I feel like what we need to do, especially because like we're still not making that much money anyways, off of bail bonds compared to how much we're spending. Like our expenditures are virtually negative, right? So we're
Mhm.
having to use more local revenue to kind of fuel that. So removing bail bonds to reduce the amount of, or reducing bail bonds to reduce the amount of inmates, in jail so that they spend less money. That could decrease our expenditures.
Mm.
And then like trying to, um, but this is not really this is out of jurisdiction, but
Yeah.
trying to have affordable, good lawyers would definitely help cases because typically among people that go in court and among race, typically your Hispanic and your Black individuals are not able to afford
Yeah.
a very good lawyer compared to white individuals. There's a higher percentage of white individuals that are um, getting a better lawyer compared to the state paralegals that other races are getting. And so, with that, the amount of times that a white male wins a court case is significantly higher than Hispanics or um, black males winning a court case for the same offense.
Yeah. And like honestly, if you're a paralegal, right?
Yeah,
Why would you want to try do your best to work that hard if you're not getting paid that much? You know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yeah,
Somebody's life is in your hands, and like you're getting paid really kind of trash for like you know what I mean? Like you're not gonna do a good job, so you're not gonna represent them well. You don't care if they win or lose.
yeah,
Like, and it sucks for the people who can't afford it, which, like you said, is true. Oftentimes, people of African American descent or like Hispanic descent
hmm,
don't necessarily, especially because like a lot of lower socioeconomic communities have high populations of people of color because of that cycle of poverty
yeah,
historically that they aren't necessarily able to get a really good lawyer in a like a law setting because like
hmm,
you're who's gonna win like the paralegal or the lawyer who got paid what $100,000.
yeah.
Obviously, the other person's gonna do a lot better.
Yep. Yep. So also going off that, like, with neglect that we were talking about previously, I found some data actually, because that is my favorite thing. According to the
Mhm.
USSC, black men who commit the same crimes as white men receive federal prison sentences that are on average nearly 20% longer.
Yep.
So there is institutionalized neglect between these races, which is something that should be addressed, specifically because I mean, if they're doing the exact same thing, why should they be getting different sentences, especially
Yeah.
with one being longer? Um, and it really boils down to race because if they're the exact same gender, exact same, area of living, economic status, things like that, same crime, they're having um,
It's
different
still unequal.
sentences. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like it's not just the like if we're gonna let's talk about like prison's role in general,
Hmm.
right? Prison's role is you mess up, you do something bad, you go there for punishment.
Yeah.
Like, but in recent years, I've been thinking in like class seminars and like discussions, like I feel like the role of prison should be rehabilitation over punishment.
I agree.
You know, rehabilitating people to be better citizens of society so they can eventually go back and be a cohesive like person of the community, not just punish them severely over and over for some. Like it definitely depends on the severity of the crime though, and like the maturity of the person. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, it's still the point still stands.
Yeah.
The goal of prison should be to provide kind of a educational rehabilitation kind of
Hmm.
setting that actually helps prisoners become better people and learn from their mistakes.
So I want to give some insight to that. I don't know if this is like it for all prisons, but personally, my county prison that I went to, they had a lot of programs that were focused on rehabilitation. Like I walked in and I saw an inmate that was attending school classes on a Chromebook, and they were doing classes. I saw people that were reading and things like that. There are rehabilitation programs, at least in my county jail. Um, And
Yeah,
I definitely agree with you that rehabilitation needs to be something important over punishment, because the entire goal is when they're out to not repeat, right? What they told me is our goal is to have them get out of jail and never come back again. That's our goal. We should never see you again. Um, because the entire goal of jail, pretty much, hopefully, is to rehabilitate them. Punishment is something that has is only going to perpetuate anger and violence.
yeah,
Because creating it, like once you introduce violence to somebody, you're giving the idea. Yes, that may introduce fear and things like that. That may stop violence for a small population, but that would just for most people, it would just create and make them harbor more anger and resentment. And so once they are free, eventually, they would just do the same things again,
yeah,
um, because of this extreme anger and hatred. And
yeah,
so trying to rehabilitate them instead of
mhm,
punishing them would
yeah,
try to help them ease into society. And we've seen some countries do this, like Finland. I know Finland has a program, or Norway, I believe, has a program where they try to rehabilitate people.
yeah,
Their success rates are extremely just
yeah,
all like just it's just incredible. I believe um 1 in 3 people that go in prison come back. So that means 2 out of 3 people that leave the prison don't come back, and they're rehabilitated in society through programs that support learning new skills, and just
yeah,
making you can get degrees in jail. So just trying to I feel like if we can adopt those kinds of policies
yeah,
that fit within our budget, because our expenditures are already so high,
yeah,
I feel like we can cut some things and reinvest it other places, because I feel like that there are things that are unnecessary that we just keep reintroducing into our environment here.
yeah.
um
So I think that like a lot of things you said were valuable. Like, let's start with the first one with like rehabilitation. A lot of times, what people don't realize is like they do have that, right? But like schooling, for example, but it's so hard to get a degree because there's such a long line of people and such limited like funds and such limited
yeah,
materials
yeah,
to go in, and that's a problem. But then you also talked about like um Finland, and yes, they do. They have really low recidivism rates, which is the rate at which people get out of jail but go back.
yeah,
You know, but what a lot of people don't realize is like Finland is a completely different country and culture,
yes,
right? They already have low crime. They have low poverty. They have they have great
great
education.
education,
Have
yeah.
it. They have homogeneity. So like, as a people, they're very white. They're like very
Hmm.
one race. And so if America is different because it's diverse.
Yeah,
There's more poverty. There's less quality education, and there's more crime in general. And I think that it's hard to compare the two. While yes, we can adopt some aspects of the Finnish prison system, which like that it's focused on. I agree with you. It's focused on rehabilitation, which I completely support.
yeah.
But we can't like completely overhaul the U.S. prison system to be exactly like the Finnish one because it's still going to be different.
I
And
I
one more, one
1000%
more
agree with you.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One more thing. Like you were talking about how like in prison you're just gonna you're exposed to like that fear thing.
Hmm.
And I agree because I have a friend whose father went to prison, and what he was telling me is prison doesn't help you become a better person, it makes you a better criminal. So once you get released from prison, because you learn how to survive in prison and how to pretty much like gang up on people and how to like assert your dominance in that way
Hmm.
and survive like that, you're pretty much being trained to be a better criminal in prison. So once you get released, you're going to keep doing what you're doing, if not worse. You know what I mean?
Yep, yep, yep. And so yeah, I definitely agree with you. I guess the way that I said it was not the greatest. What I want the United States to do is we are spending a lot of money, yet we really in the wrong places is what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
collectively, American taxpayers pay approximately 80 billion towards annual prison costs every year. But not many people know where that money goes. And so number one, trying to be transparent with how money is being distributed and how we're
Mhm.
spending our money. Because this is taxpayer dollars that is going towards jails and things like that that could be spent on education, infrastructure. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing more potholes recently without them being filled. Um, Taxpayer dollars could fill those. There is this has been going on for years and years and years, but schools are underfunded. I mean, plainly, public schools um, are just plainly underfunded because we don't, number one, have the budget for it. Number two, we don't want to increase property taxes or sales taxes or income taxes for it.
Yeah.
Um, and three, there's really no way to include that into just like where, however we're, like our bill and things like that, in our
Hmm.
budget. And so they're always going to get pretty much rejected if they bills that they would get rejected just
Yeah.
because it cannot really work financially. It's fiscally impossible, which is unfortunate. But back to what I was saying about jails, I think it's important that we, number one, be transparent with our money. Number two, we should like, I guess what I'm trying to say is we should adopt policies that, like I said before, rehabilitate rather than punish. And I feel like that was my main goal, um, in what I was trying to say. If we rehabilitate, if we adopt some policies that fit within our budget of Finland and successful, um, that have successful rates of what was the word again?
Hmm. Recidivism.
Recidivism, yeah, that's right. If they have low rates of recidivism, I feel like
Hmm.
it's imperative that we should, and it fits within our budget, of course. I feel like it's imperative that we should implement those policies here. Um, and
I agree.
I feel like number one, I guess we passed number one. Like number three, I guess, um, trying to costs on what we're spending because like I've seen what we spent that money on. Like people that there's things that could easily be cut um that really should not be spent on it. Like
Yeah.
and number one, like number four, we are we are sending so many people to jail for crimes that are so petty that we're spending more money just housing them than we are just in general. Like we are spending more money on them without any return back. Like we're receiving no gain from sending these people to jail. Like this is all just negative, which is horrible. I mean, there's no point in somebody sending somebody to jail with zero purpose. I feel like because we're not
Yeah.
gaining anything from this. We're just sending them to jail. We're spending $47 a night on them, right, for some
Yeah.
drug charges or something like that. Mind you, sex abuse charges, murder charges, they need to go to jail. I agree wholeheartedly. But these minor offenses that were just bad decisions, those I feel like it's not worth the money to just keep them in for a couple nights because it adds up very quickly.
Yeah. And I think, okay, I have some stats to kind of support what you were
Mhm.
saying about uh the how we were talking about like the wait lists for college courses and like the amount of college courses. So apparently President Bill Clinton signed a bill that eliminated state government sponsored financial aid
Mhm.
and reduced the number of college course programs in prisons from 350 to 12.
Oh wow.
And additionally, on top of that, some of the largest prison training programs can have a waiting list of 10,000 people.
Wow.
And that is very shocking because even if you want to do it, you're limited to such an extent.
Yeah, I
Also, like if we were talking about, you were talking about like prisons, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is that what federal and state prisons like to do, especially also private prisons, but that we'll get into that later.
Mhm.
Private prisons, just federal and state prisons, they'll hold they want pretty much they generate a profit from the amount of prisoners in their prisons at a given time.
Yeah.
The state will basically, or the government will basically say, if you don't have this many prisoners in your prison by the end of whatever, we're gonna take this many $1 million away from you.
Yeah.
And so the prisons are obviously spurred to try to incarcerate as many people and keep them
Yeah.
in as long as possible. it is in their best interest as a business to do that because they don't want to lose millions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I like the fact that you called it a business.
Yeah.
Because I mean the way that I'm hearing things, and the way that I've seen things, I feel like it is a business at times,
Yeah.
because like when it becomes a race to see how many people you incarcerate, I feel like that's less just and more. And mind you, this isn't um every jail. There have
Yeah.
like the jail that I went to, I feel like that was not anywhere close to a business. I feel like that was
Yeah.
rehabilitation. Um, I mean, mind you, there were weird people in there, um, but the idea of that jail was to get them out with the intention of them not coming back. Um,
Yeah.
but there are others that receive a lot in funding that should not because of their high incarceration rates. And with that, there comes a lot of um, there's a lot of corruption that goes around with how you're incarcerating, what you're incarcerating them with. And like we said, approximately for the same sentence, black men serve 20% longer than white men, um, which is an absurd number. I feel like because that if somebody spends 5 years in jail as a white male, you're gonna spend 6 years in jail, an entire year or more, just for having a different just being a different skin color, just being a part of a different
Yeah.
race. That's absurd.
Yeah. I agree. And yeah. And we can talk about like the fact that we can switch over to like
Hmm.
prison labor, right? Because prison labor, what a lot of people don't realize is, yeah, they get paid, but they get paid like 25 cents to like $1 an hour.
Yeah.
Literally nothing. And how is that gonna, give you any sense of responsibility or like work ethic?
Yeah, they
Because
generally just like pick up trash or make driver's license.
yeah. And because the thing is, right, in the Constitution it says like that we abolish slavery except from a form of punishment. So I think that kind of leads into the prison system because as a form of punishment, they're pretty much getting to work, but work for literally so much less than the federal minimum wage, which is already unlivable.
Yeah.
Like, you're just like exploiting that prison workforce, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's right.
I remember to like at the start of the pandemic, in New York, where Governor at the time, Governor Andrew Cuomo,
Yeah,
utilized prison labor to create hand sanitizer, like a mass amount of hand sanitizer. And then I believe in the state of Tennessee, we use prison labor to create driver's licenses, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I believe so. And so we're just using prison labor. Um, cheap labor, um, I feel like is very unjust. Um,
yeah,
because we're not paying them anything close to the minimum
yeah,
wage. Even or just in general, we're not paying them anything, no matter if it's the minimum wage or not. We are paying them nothing for like harsh hours. Um, and they're just limited to their cells and things like that. Um, I feel like that's really not just because I mean these are the people that are committed the minor offenses, generally because the ones that have murder charges aren't usually allowed to go out and pick trash and things like that. Um,
yeah,
so these minor offenses that are the result of bad decisions, true bad decisions, and
yeah,
not just like being a bad person, things like that, or just being incarcerated because of your skin color and things like that. I feel like that is very important that we not only pay them more, because paying them more would incentivize more education. Also, we need to increase um, we need to put more emphasis on education because I mean studies show that the more education you have, generally the more money you'll make,
mhm,
and the more well, no, not you'll just be more educated, so you'll be able to make more conscious decisions. Um,
yeah,
making somebody more educated only gives us benefits, right? Because it being more educated would lower crime rate, right? So we'd have to spend like less money on jails, which could be redistributed, reallocated towards other things, either in the jail or in other sections of our fiscal, like our breakdown, which could maybe go towards like more rehabilitation, more opportunities for education and more degrees, like you said, because the wait lists are so long. So trying to put more emphasis on education and put add more wage, or we could add the money towards wages. Putting more emphasis on education would overall not only decrease crime rate, but would um just help the society grow as a whole. With Instead of incarcerated individuals, people that have made mistakes and learned from them, right?
Yeah.
These are people that have made mistakes, right? Not people that have done horrible things. They've learned from their mistakes, and that ties back to rehabilitation.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to transition to some punishments that I personally think are very inhumane, such as solitary confinement.
Mm,
I think solitary confinement is often overlooked in the discussion of the prison system and its flaws or its strengths, because it's a form of punishment of a punishment, right? You do something bad in jail, oftentimes you get solitary confinement like that. Solitary confinement is such an inhumane form of punishment because number one, it leads to it's basically you're stuck in a room, no windows, no social opportunities, just by yourself in silence, and that creates such a terrible mental state for you, and it's caused people to literally go
yeah.
insane, like suicide, like insane. Like I remember I saw some story of some guy who spent so long in solitary confinement that after he got out that he was like depressed, and so he killed himself because of that.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't realize is the extent how often it's utilized for literally a minor, like a small fight that you might have. Solitary confinement for
Hmm.
however long, and that not only exacerbates the problem of mentally healthy people, but it exacerbates the problem for mentally ill people who already have problems because they already aren't getting the adequate excuse me, the adequate help that they need for their mental illnesses, and especially for people with like drug addiction or who
Hmm.
are addicted to alcohol, and like the drawbacks that they have and like the withdrawal syndromes that they have.
Yeah.
They can't really get that. They can't just go cold turkey like that.
Oh my God. Sorry. So I just found some data. Um, and not to mention, based off what you're saying, of the financial aspect, whereas year in solitary confinement averages around $75,000 per prisoner, which is around more than three times the average annual cost of incarceration in the United States, and eight times the average annual cost of public university tuition. Um, and
Oh.
once you multiply that by how many people are in solitary confinement, would you like to take a guess?
Um, Let me. How many? I don't know. Like,
10,000, more than 10,000 people, right? That is a
like
lot of money. And
yeah.
not to mention, right, like you said, the disastrous effects on the mental state, because your mental state is very important to your well-being. It's something that you can't see, right? You can't see them in vitals or anything like that. Um
Yeah.
it's real. Mental health is very real, and a lack of mental health in these institutions of prisons and things like that, they're so minimal and they are so lackluster that they do not provide any kind of moral help or any kind of again, we're going back to rehabilitation,
Thing just
or healing. Like, it doesn't allow people to heal. That is, it just creates more depression. And solitary confinement, right, that's literally just, like you said, just being in a box, pretty much. You're in
hmm
concrete, and that's it. So that's extremely depressing, right?
yes.
Not being able to experience, other like people and things like that, just meeting other people. I remember when I was in jail, I felt so uncomfortable, and I went out when I like got out. I was so thankful, that I wasn't in jail, because I'm not a claustrophobic person. I felt so just like constricted to my environment in there.
hmm
I was like, because with all the locked doors and things like that, I felt so constrained,
Yeah.
that you don't really appreciate the true freedom that you have until you go inside somewhere that restricts it.
Yeah.
And so the amount of restriction that is placed um in jails, and which makes sense, of course, but the amount of restriction that's placed on solitary confinement, where you're not able to do virtually anything, is so draining on the mental state that it causes, like you said, suicides and things like that. It causes severe effects on people. I could probably pull up a statistic on really how many people, based off a survey, how many people say that they're depressed after solitary confinement, if they even can get out, right? Because how many people truly, if they're in solitary confinement, like what do they do? Um, Sometimes it's something that's disastrous. Sometimes it's something that's minor, but was taken into extreme effect because of underlying factors of corruption. Um, if they do get out, I could bet you that most of them would say that it was extremely taxing for them emotionally, and that they're either severely depressed or like they're just emotionally devastated after the solitary confinement time.
Yeah. So I have a quote from Juan E. Mendez, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture.
Mm-hmm.
He was quoted as telling the General Assembly, "Solitary confinement is a harsh measure which is contrary to rehabilitation, the aim of the penitentiary system." And he is considering the severe mental pain of suffering solitary confinement may cause. It can amount to torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Additionally, the UN Convention Against Torture and the World Health Organization classifies the practice of solitary confinement as torture.
Mm-hmm.
And they stated that anything longer than 15 days is pretty much 100% cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and harmful to an individual's health.
Yeah. So, and
And
then also,
hold
sorry.
on, what
Oh,
you were
good.
saying, like it's actually over 80,000 men, women, and children are currently in solitary confinement and are subject to no touch torture, which is also like sensory deprivation.
Mm-hmm. And then also what you said, basically going off of that too, adding to it, living without normal social interaction or mental stimuli can alter the chemistry and structure of the brain, resulting in
Yeah,
feelings of loneliness and depression, which is, according to an article, isolation can be as distressing as physical torture.
yeah,
And so these people are locked up for 22 and a half hours.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
not being able to really see anybody other than maybe an officer, is super, super, um, causes extreme torture to people, as shown in mental health. Because I mean, you can't see it, but the altering of the brain is very painful.
uh-huh.
And so approximately 25% of the people in prison, 35% of those in jail who had spent 30 days or longer in solitary confinement, had symptoms of serious psychological distress. So, I mean,
Yeah,
in this, the rates were extremely similar for those who only spent 1 day in isolation. So it's not like it's, like if you're in for 1 day, it's fine, and then it gets worse. The second you're in there,
you already feel the
you're already feel it, right? 1 day compared to several years is the exact
yeah,
same, if not worse, right? But it's not significantly worse. Like it is an extreme effect the second
yeah,
you get in
yeah,
there.
because you jump from being like normal into that you're gonna see a spike in like distress levels and like the significant decrease in mental health just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we should also talk about private prisons
Hmm.
because I think that's our last major point, our private prisons, because companies like Course, formerly known as Core Civic, it's now known as CCA or the Corrections Corporation of America. Most private prisons are owned by the CCA, and they're they pretty much can operate and do whatever they want. So they definitely make a profit because
Yeah.
they make a profit by keeping those inmates in again, like we said. And to make up for the loss, there are like quotas. So they kind of treat people like commodities, which is does not sit right with me.
Yeah. I'm looking into it right now, and it's pretty much saying that like, um private prisons capitalize on mass incarceration, and
Yeah.
how they were pretty much exploited, for capital, which is pretty bad. And yeah, like Core Civic and Geo Group collectively manage half of the private prison contracts with combined revenues of $3.5 billion. This is
Yeah.
revenue, right? This is not profit, or this is revenue.
Mhm.
Um, that's so high, right?
Yeah,
This is a prison, right? This is for rehabilitation. Revenue is something that should not be stated. Um, because I feel like that money should be reinvested to rehabilitate people instead of
I
being
agree.
called as revenue. According to this, the total like prison population in 2016 is around 1.5 million. Total private population is around 128,000.
Yeah,
So, but the change from 2000 to 2016 was 47%.
yeah,
That's insane.
yeah.
And
And according to Tom Beasley
mhm,
in 1988, who was the co-founder of CCA, he literally stated, "You just sell prisons like you were selling cars or real estate or hamburgers."
wow.
He literally said that.
I feel like we're forgetting to realize that these people are humans and they are real human beings, and
Yeah.
that we should treat them with humaneness and dignity and respect. I feel like we're treating people as tools and just labor, um,
Hmm.
and I feel like that's really degrading. Um, but also another point, private immigrant detention centers, and that's
Hmm.
a story for another day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Increased 442% from 2000 to 2016. But that's just a little brain teaser for.
Yeah. Yeah. And like one of the biggest like selling points for private prisons are that they're newer and cheaper alternatives to federal and state prisons. And like their sales pitch appeared to support their claim, but it was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Because in reality, private prisons cost just as much as federal prisons.
Yep. But they just
And
gain more profit.
yeah, exactly. And it's they just treat they treat inmates pretty much however they want to.
That's horrible.
And I agree with you, like we need to be reallocating some of our funding because even a lot of our taxpayer dollars do not go to prisons. Most of it goes to like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, stuff like
Yeah.
that. But we should be able to reallocate government funds into education and also into like treating people like how they deserve to be
Yes.
treated.
I feel like the term reinvestment is something that we should definitely use because
Yeah,
we need to reinvest the money that we've spent
yeah,
into making our society better. And making our society better includes, taking that money that could be extra and adding more education for specifically for incarcerated people, right? Education
mhm,
is very important. Then we could also introduce that to the education sector of, schools and things like that. We could also implement that in infrastructure. There's so many places that this like extra finance could be allocated towards, yet we're not doing it. That I feel like there's so many places that we can just cut our money, right? And just put that in other places. And so if we completely, this will take time, of course, but if we
yeah,
can restructure the entire incarceration system and the prison system to make it less corrupt, more financially responsible, physically responsible, and charge people, um, for charges that actually should be, um, considered real criminal offenses rather than
yeah,
petty charges
yeah.
that cost,
I agree.
states more than it costs the more that they don't even gain anything from.
Yeah,
Um, Completely revamping. I feel like this calls for a complete, pretty much revamp
I
of our
agree.
system.
Kind of like a full turnover.
We
Yeah,
need a complete revamp of the prison system, and in doing so, will create such a better society.
yeah, I agree. And with that, our discussion comes to an end. We thank you for listening and hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. Don't forget to follow the Pepper Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you.